Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh Ship. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of really fun people show up on this show every single week. But this one is I always say I'm gonna have a special show, but this one really is a very special one. Alex is beyond looking like a better looking doppelganger of myself, is really a true international man of mysteries. Alex has got a really fascinating career as an entrepreneur. He's been involved in some really interesting businesses and areas that I'm actually very passionate about. He happens to also be very active at Argo AI, one of the leading self-driving car companies in the world, which is a fascinating subject. But I happen to know him as the guy that I met on the Gumball Rally in 2007. And if you're not aware of what the Gumball Rally is, it is a semi-legal international supercar rally race that took place across, when I did it, I think it was 17 countries in 7 days. So really, really wild stuff. If you get a chance, look it up. But that's all you're going to hear for now, because you got to tune in to this week's episode of Oh Shit. Great. We're glad you're here. I hope you're just tuning in, whether you're coming in through Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or even on oshipshow.com, wherever you're tuning in. Thank you for watching. I'd love for you to meet my good friend, Alex Roy. Alex, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you, Freddie Laker.
See, I'm glad I got that beard. Like we could just, the video guy could just flip between the two shots. It's like little bold glasses guy clones. I like it.
For the record, these are not for show, the prescription. I stare at a computer screen all day, and I'm also a fan of Kara Swisher, so that's why I have the...
You're talking to a guy that has 4 pairs of glasses directly in front of his keyboard, so I feel your pain. If I can, I'm about a month away from starting to double stack them just so I can see my computer properly. So I fully endorse your need to wear proper glasses, and I think I need to up my blue tint game seriously. To catch up with yours.
People ask me why I don't get LASIK, and I say, well, because when you get to my age, as a man, you want to accessorize, but not too much. And glasses are one of the few outlets that are acceptable, and they're not controversial. So
I agree. I'm glad. We don't want you to go through like a beret phase or something like that.
I went through that in the 90s.
Did you? It's the 90s, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
That's awesome. So I have to say, a lot of times when people come on the show, we'll talk about, maybe they start where they started their career or where they started their first business. But I think in your case, I'm sorry, it will have to be how we first met. And so
the Gumball.
Oh yeah. No, it's so a tiny little tangent, a little bit of backstory. I have a very, very good friend called Steve Schimmel. Steve happens to be the 13th employee of Google. And I met Steve right after he'd gotten a divorce. He married his high school sweetheart. We met in Miami. And we met, I think I was actually, knew his cousin. We met through a cousin. And the first night we met, I liked him, he liked me. And I was a kind of a young entrepreneur. And I remember thinking, man, this guy, he could teach me some cool stuff about business. And I don't think he'd ever been single in his life. And I thought, I could teach this guy something about girls. This is going to be great. This is going to be a great, great partnership. And so I go hang out with him one weekend. And he says, I tell him we were kind of staying up all night and having kind of wild nights in San Francisco in the kind of mid-2000s. I tell him about the Gumball Rally, which, is this kind of all supercars, 100-car rally race. It's quite expensive to get in. You have to have one of these cars, which I've done good, but I've done well, but not that well, and certainly at the time. And he calls me up and goes, "Man, we should do that Gumball thing." And I was like, I just really can't. It's a bit out of my league, Steve. And he's like, "Okay." He calls me back about an hour later. He's like, "Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll pay for everything. You just have to cover all the drink bar bills, and you have to make sure I have a good time." I was like, I could do that for you. I can be that friend. And it's funny, when we got out there, we didn't actually realize we were going to be trapped in a car 13 or 14 hours a day together for 7 straight days. Steve and I ended up, I think you're at the end of that, you're either worst enemies or best friends. Luckily, we ended up as best friends. When I got there, I was the guy who did Gumball because it was an adventure. It was just something fun and silly I wanted to do. But then there was other people at Gumball that did it because it was a real race to them. Intro Alex Roy, who I find out has a fake Italian police car and spends his evenings driving with the lights off and night vision goggles on, so that he can basically evade police cars to set speed records in between the two checkpoints. So you're a legend then, and you're a legend still to me, Alex. I always get a huge kick out of any of your stories, and I know that everyone watching today is going to get a kick out of some of your stories too.
Well, I'm curious, Freddie, when you signed up to do the Gumball, were you not aware of the logistics involved or the distances or what was going to happen?
I mean, I can't decide if I learned about. I think I know I learned about it from some guys in London. I think that was the year that it ended up on Jackass. I don't think Jackass had had it before that. I think we had the Jackass year, if I remember correctly, literally for multiple reasons. I don't know. It just seems, it seems very conceptual. I'd never done anything like that before. I was like, hey, you go from checkpoint to checkpoint, and they have some big parties, and everyone's driving these glam cars. What I didn't realize was that it was like, oh, like you're not supposed to be able to go between those two checkpoints in that much time on a reasonable daily basis. So yeah, it was a little crazy. It was a little crazy. And the fact that we had our car impounded the first day and then had to, do all kinds of crazy stuff to even finish it is a bit dumbfounding on its own.
Well, are you familiar with SimCity, the game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever read any interviews with Will Wright, the inventor?
I have not, but I would love to hear this.
Yeah, if I've never spoken to him directly, but he in 1981, he went on this underground illegal race called the U.S. Express, which was the true successor to the Cannonball Run, which was an actual nonstop illegal race across the United States. And he is probably the only truly intelligent and lucid speaker on why driving long distances is interesting and as an exercise, and maybe even on driving itself.
Yeah.
And he says that when you're driving, it's one of the few things you can do where you actually truly mesh with the machine, even in an analog vehicle that has no direct connection. Because when you have, if you have an accident or a crash, you never say, my car had a crash. You say, I had a crash, because the car in effect has become your body. There is an interface. It's an analog interface, but it exists. So he said that in one interview. In another interview, he talked about big games in life. And there are a lot of people for whom their career paths and things they do are one discrete thing they do, and then they check out, they go home. And then at home they may play actual games, video games or board games, whatever. And then there are people for whom their careers, their businesses is the grand game. And the stakes are always everything. Not, beyond money, time, energy. I mean, time is the only true currency we have. And so he talks about how there are big games beyond one's career. And the truly big games are, unfortunately, the ones where everything's at stake and everything is transcending money or time, and it's your life. And what makes it a game is that it's completely voluntary, unlike war, which may not be voluntary. And
do you think skydiving, like something like that, falls into this category of big games for people?
I think there's elements of big games to skydiving, although it's pretty binary. You go up, you come down. There aren't any choices except where you go to go up and come down. And I have a good friend who is a semi-professional skydiver. We've talked about it. And he thought that I was an idiot for ever driving a car fast, which I was. And I think
I'm not going to comment on that.
I don't want to call him an idiot because I consider skydiving insane. And of course, we all have these paths to getting to the same thing, which is, what is our game? What is the game that satisfies the need for something that money cannot buy? because there are things money cannot buy. And for me, I made the gumball and the cannonball. That became my game. I would never take the risks I took today. I'm a different person.
It's funny that you made a great. By the way, I totally get with this concept of, especially particularly, I guess, at my stage, the career thing being a big game. I think it can be fun, and you can play it like a game if you enjoy it enough. But you said to me a second ago, I thought was really interesting. This this it's very binary when you think about skydiving. When you think about driving, particularly in complex environments, there's lots of little decisions that make that up. From you can't anticipate the things that may appear on the road. Maybe you can understand the waypoints, but there's so many variables changing all the time. That obviously sets up a really great correlation to what you spend a lot of your professional time working on with Argo AI. The concept of implementing self-driving. I mean, talk about trying to address, arguably one of the biggest games in the world and an incredibly complex subject. What's your take of kind of where the industry's at now, and how close are we really? Because you hear people kind of hypothesize this stuff over, pontificate over blogs and frankly dinners and drinks and everything else. What's your take as an industry level?
Well, to be clear, I don't represent Argo AI here today. I would prefer to answer that by talking about why I believe it's a good idea. Autonomous vehicles are a good idea. There's two kinds of driving. There's what we do for pleasure, which if one has any maturity, one goes to a racetrack. And if one is an idiot like I was, one goes and does the gumball or attempts to set a record. But most people don't do those things. For most people, driving is work, to get to work or to get to school. And it's repetitive, and it is over time just very tedious. So, historically, for every tedious thing people have come to take for as practice, as standard, a technology has risen to address it. And every time that's happened, people have said, oh, well, why everything's fine the way it is. That's impossible. Why, and how do you build a business? The first two things make no sense, because if technology can be invented, someone will, and it will find its place. The only interesting question is, what's the business? And so we're still, in the first two, addressing the first two things. There are people, which is hard to believe, who don't believe it's necessary, and who don't think it can be done. And so my podcast that I just launched, the No Parking Podcast, is an attempt to cut through the hype and educate people about what autonomous vehicles are, how they work, and what artificial intelligence is. Because there's nothing more overused than acronyms like AI.
Yeah, especially lately, it feels like.
I drive a Tesla. I mean, I don't know. Have you driven a Tesla?
Yeah.
So people call that a self-driving car. It's not.
Yeah.
It's got driver assistance, which is not the same thing as self-driving. And artificial intelligence is so overused that it's a cliche in movie plots. So I would say that autonomous vehicles in some form have been with us for a long time. If you go to an airport, there's probably a people mover that goes from A to B on a fixed track.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And there is a wide variety of autonomous devices. A Roomba has some elements of autonomy. And so the interesting questions are, what products are built to address what problems, and then what is the business around those products? So I'm reading, I just ordered a number of books on the history, a cultural history of elevators. And so people who are skeptical about autonomous vehicles and like what effect they might have on jobs often say, well, elevator operators all lost their jobs. So the answer to that is, but they went on to do other things, and they were superfluous. But the interesting thing about elevator history that no one talks about is, prior to the ubiquity of elevators, that the most valuable real estate, residential real estate, was on the second floor. And
you were up, but that was as high as you could go without wanting to have to get a lift.
Storage in urban areas was on the top floor, which traditionally ended at 10. and which meant there was a lot of really unfortunate labor being spent, people going up and down stairs carrying boxes, and storage in urban areas is very difficult. So elevators
I did not know that, by the way. That's a nice bit of random history. I didn't know.
Elevators unlocked value in real estate by inverting the value, which is brilliant and fascinating. And of course, Otis with the safety elevator, which was a mechanism to prevent them from falling if there was a failure in the machinery to
Do you think you'd have the same? Is it the same kind of correlation as what maybe happens with suburbia now? Like, or is suburbia at the 10th floor, and the people are like, you don't need to be as urban anymore? I mean, is that the kind of thinking that you might extrapolate from this? Or?
One might have said that at one time pre-COVID, but there are
right.
second, third, and fourth order consequences to autonomy and COVID that I don't know. I have not yet mapped out, although I've been part of conversation that do map it. But the second thing about autonomous vehicle, well, elevators, which is interesting, is that because elevators unlocked value in real estate, urbanization grew not in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion, and along with all the second order consequences, and businesses built around the fact that they existed. So, and that goes way beyond the value of real estate. So if pre-COVID, it was argued that autonomy might unlock value in real estate outside urban centers, that would be true if the businesses deploying autonomy were optimized around that. But autonomy is going to roll out like elevators did. It will begin where there's demand, and then the businesses around it will compel new iterations. And it's premature to predict that. Because if you can't build a profitable business around a technology, then technology is irrelevant.
Doesn't go very long. Yeah.
And there's a lot of things we could build today that people have not yet built affordably, and there's hence no business. So.
Yeah, it's I'm watching all these different startups that are popping up now, and from this subscription car models and so on, and I can't help but predict that we're going to see our fair share of oh ship moments, as we like to call them on the show, as people kind of bet wrong, but these are big games, to use your words, that's happening right now. And when they bet wrong, man, is it going to be expensive this time around?
Well, if it's like another great example of technology that seems inevitable and we take for granted, but its outcome and path to today was not known, was the rise of AC versus DC power. Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. Are you familiar with The Current War? Which was
no, explain it to me.
Terrible movie. Don't ever watch the movie. But there's two books. There's a book called Empires of Light, and there's another one called Last Days of Night. Empires of Light is the nonfiction story, and Last Days of Night is the fictional version of the same era, where Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse were at war over which system would become ubiquitous for the propagation of electrical power in the United States, AC versus DC. And the real life Nikola Tesla worked at one time for Edison. And so the short version is that Edison's vision was that that you'd have these massive generators that would transmit power over short distances. And so Manhattan would have hundreds or thousands of these massive generators. And Tesla and eventually Westinghouse were like, no, we can transmit power over long distance. The infrastructures for the two was completely different. And I won't give away what happened, but today everyone has AC power coming out of the wall. And General Electric was the company that ended up becoming Westinghouse and GE, the dominant company making that happen. So the history of business is as germane as the technology itself, because they both could have been hit by trains. Tesla could have met someone who was a good business manager, and we could have wireless power today, but we don't, because Tesla did not have a business bone in his body.
So I'm going to use this, but it's fascinating, man. I love it. I always love that you tap into so many interesting stories. I'm going to use this to segue over, though, I think, to part of your own story. So, clearly those guys had some serious oh shit moments along their journeys. I think I'd love to hear if you think back on your own career and you've been an entrepreneur, you've started multiple businesses, you've been dabbled in all kinds of different aspects of the business world. Is there anything, if you look back on in time, that you can kind of single out as like oh yeah, that was a bit of a disaster that I learned something from, besides meeting me?
Meeting you was great because there's so few. I mean, what makes life worth living is going somewhere, not knowing what to expect, having an open mind, and then meeting a person who is what's the word I want to say? Well, unique. Some people are irreplaceable. You can always make new friends, but you can never replace individual characters. You know, and so you're one of those people.
Thank you, man.
The
I think.
Gumball was one of those events that attracted, call it 200 people, and no less than 30 of those people would be truly interesting.
Yeah,
I have friends today, you're among them. Another one is Charles Morgan from Morgan Motor Cars. And there are many others that I met on the Gumball because you don't know what to expect. And that was, I consider myself very lucky. But I had a number of catastrophic business failures. And I wish I had more of them earlier in my life.
yeah,
I'm almost 50 now. And if I'd had them in my 20s, I would have gone further faster.
yeah.
I had the benefit of two things happened to me. I both made a lot of money on my own and inherited money when I lost my father in a very short span of time. And so I fell into the trap of believing I was both entitled and brilliant, when in fact I had been both lucky and clever, which is not the same thing. So, and so, no, years later, I had a startup, Figure 9. It was online sales of consumer electronics in 1999 and 2000, ahead of its time. But I was focused on the wrong product.
Yeah.
I was focused on an online macromedia flash-based visualization of moving furniture around and picking your stereo and couch and putting it on the same screen. And I thought that UI was absolutely, without that, we were nothing.
Yeah.
And one of our competitors instead went out, secured products, and began shipping Harman Kardon stereos and speakers, where we spent a year of investor money and time trying to make this UI work.
And it was just like people just wanted to ship product, get it.
They just wanted to order stuff.
Price.
They didn't even want a discount. They just didn't want to go to a store. And I was trying to recreate the store experience on the internet in 2000. Big mistake. We shut down after the market crash of that year, and so that was I didn't know how to. I thought the wrong thing was the product, and I was completely wrong. And so, and many years later, I was running the family business, and I had 10 brilliant years. And even after 9/11, we were in the travel business, and we recovered, and I made a lot of correct decisions, and I stuck to my guns, and I didn't sell, but I held on for too long. I passed up on several great offers, and then in 2008 we had the market collapse, and I had held on too long. I had too many good years. I'd weathered one disaster, but the second one, I didn't have the maturity or insight to see it. And so which led to then the third big lesson is I kept putting money into the business when I should have literally shut it down or sold it for whatever it was worth at the time. I kept putting money in the business thinking that the prior model would return. And that was 2009, 2010. Around that time, that was the two things happened. You had the Darpa Challenges, where the government, DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and they invest in technologies which may then be used by the military or intelligence. And DARPA was running these challenges in the desert that were for autonomous vehicles to get across the desert. And teams from all these universities were building the first, well, not first, but they were building autonomous vehicles to compete. This is around the time that I had broken the cannonball record across the United States. Mm. And as part of, so I was distracted from the family business. I was very focused on building a new business and a brand around being me. And I was the guy who'd broken the cannonball run record. I'd used mountains of technology, specifically Google Earth and Maps, to deep research the geography of the terrain, determine where police might be, study weather and traffic patterns. Waze did not exist. Google Maps was fairly new. I used Google Earth and some very old interfaces. So I had become, by accident, kind of an expert in deploying off-the-shelf mapping tools to solve a problem which was of no relevance to anyone: how to drive across the United States at high speed without getting caught. Meanwhile, these people from Carnegie Mellon and Stanford and MIT were using similar tools plus engineering backgrounds to build vehicles to cross the desert at low speed to solve a real problem people want
safely. Yeah.
To solve safety, whereas I was solving for my ego.
Yeah.
And so in 2009, 2010, all those people who had done the DARPA challenge went on to raise money or get hired by Google to create companies building autonomous vehicles to make the road safer. I was selling services to companies like Piaggio, who looked at what I had done and said, well, he knows how to build a website that incorporates Google Maps and YouTube. He knows how to translate motion-based events in time into content. And so Piaggio hired me to do a website incorporating video and maps for the launch of one of their scooters. And then here I was with a pile of money that was mine, a floundering travel agency, and tech I didn't know how to productize, trying to decide what to do. And I opened a nightclub and a bar. And I couldn't find any more clients for my web services business. And I had broken the cannonball record. I got an agent, I got a book deal, and I waited for my travel agency to come back. It didn't. And so that was a major lost opportunity. If I had not been so wrapped up in making myself the product, and if I had done market research and tried to build content around what I was doing instead of myself, if I had been driving around Manhattan with a video camera, creating content and maps and embedding that video into Google Maps, I might have built a different business which survived. And so that was.
I'd love to flip this, and I think for anyone who's watching right now, who's watched prior ships, and I say Alex has a great sense of humor about himself, but he's touching on a really important point. And I think that when you see a lot of successful people that we've been very fortunate enough to have on their ship, hubris and you get really confident, and you sometimes let your ego get the better of you. And I don't mean ego in like a negative way. I'm talking about just a self-confidence, for better or worse. And I've certainly been prone to making mistakes because of it. I know a lot of other people have, and it's really hard. It's like when you're almost like gambling. It's like, when do you know to put the cards down, kind of thing, right? And to call it. And it's a really, really hard thing to do. Is there any, if you look at it in simplistic terms, and you're saying, look, other people, like, how do you check your ego, or how do you encourage other people to be aware of this kind of stuff? You meet a young entrepreneur tomorrow and you saw that person going down a similar path. Would you tell them your story, or is there something like a trick you could say, hey, now when I notice myself doing this kind of stuff, this is what I do to self-check myself, or whatever?
I mean, I think,
Or is it just now you just have self-awareness because that's
uh,
called growing the hell up? You know what I
it's
mean?
good. I hate the idea of fail fast, but one does have to fail to understand what one's limitations are, the limitations of the product or the business. You know, in the movie Dune, the book Dune, if you read
Yeah,
that.
I love it. My favorite book of all time, mind you, by the way, for anyone who's mining information and wants to hack into my accounts or bank.
So there's in the Dune
Now I'm gonna
history,
have to change all those security passwords. Damn it.
there's the Untitled rule. I don't know where the word comes from, which is the strength of something is unknown until it is broken.
Yeah.
And so that is true. I think, look, the strength of leaders. I have a friend named Jake Millar who does a podcast about leadership too. And we've discussed this. The common thing, leadership is not, strength is not stubbornness. Strength is knowing what one's gaps are and both asking others for their opinion, getting the facts, data is everything, and not being emotional. And I'm emotional to this day, about often when I shouldn't be. And
This means you care.
thankfully,
Nothing wrong with
the thing is, I am now currently, for the first time in my life, working for someone else.
that.
Between the age of 28 and 47, I was self-employed. I was an entrepreneur,
You
and
did, in fairness, you did pick. If you had to work for someone else, you do have a really, really cool company you work for. So you
yeah,
got that at least.
and the reason is, between 2011, I shut down the family business, and between 2011 and 2015, I started another company, and I was one of the people involved with something called Drive, which became thedrive.com. Today, it's one of the largest automotive websites in the world, and I was in a group of people who were one of the original founders, and um, and so my lesson is not necessarily one of leadership, but is one has to always be ready to pivot massively towards opportunity and not be
Mhm,
wedded to a single politic
mhm,
or point of view. So I'm a
mhm.
car guy my whole life. I love driving. I love driving fast, and I've taken incredibly stupid risks earlier in my career. Um, in between 2011 and 2015, when I learned of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, all my friends and peers said, "Stupid, never work, expensive, dumb, all crap." And all I could think was, imagine if the passion and loyalty people have for cars someday existed for electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. Who are those people? Who is executing correctly? So I decided to become a journalist and an investor in new automotive technology. I used the Drive, where I was an editor, as a method of doing market research. As a journalist, I would go to these companies, I would cover them, and then if I found it interesting, I would ask them, well, what is unbuilt? And I became an angel investor in a number of companies in the sector. And then in 2015, there was the first crash. The first person was a kill as a result of an autonomous vehicle that was testing in Arizona. And then all of the interviews I had done with all of the leadership of most of the companies in this sector suddenly became very valuable. And
Mhm.
among them was a guy named Brian Selesky. And among all the CEOs and all the founders of all those companies, he was unique in that he was an incredible business leader. He was not just an engineer, although he's an engineer. He had
Mhm.
won the Darpa Challenge back in 2007.
Mm.
And he had been one of the first people at Google's division, which became Waymo. But he was truly honest about the opportunity and the limitations of the technology. And he talked a lot about the business. And so I vowed I would never work for anyone else in my life. But when he offered me a role, I had to say yes, because I was like, no, this is someone who is going to do something that's going to work, because he's addressing the business component. And and that is why I did it. And so
And I
knowing,
love that your role is safety specific. It's just
well,
I
no,
can't
my
even
role
say
is
it
not
without
safety
giggling a little
specific.
bit.
To be clear, what the company does and what an autonomous vehicle company has to do,
Yeah.
safety has to be foundational. It
Yeah.
has to be baked in from the beginning, or else you're in the wrong business. Um, and so my role is my title is director of special operations, but my role is really an educational one, and understanding how these things work, telling the story is something that is not just about. I mean, people call it communications or public relations, but generally, but it's bigger than that. And so, my whole life, every business I've ever done, everything I've ever done successfully, was about building a narrative, telling a story. It was often my own story, and so now I'm helping tell a story that is not mine. That in a way, I am a small.
It's a story to be involved with on any level. On a side note, I can't help but imagine these like meetings happening over there, and people are like, "We don't need to plan for this edge case because no one would ever do that in a car." And you're like, "Actually,
Yeah, well, that is the joke, of course, is that who would know best about an edge case than me?
like that's insane. We don't have to plan for that. I've done it 3 times." I do
Yeah.
want to segue, just being conscious of time. You got a new podcast out. Clearly, you're a fascinating guy. Tell us about the new podcast. What are you going to be talking about on that? What kind of guests are you going to have?
So,
Who's it for?
the No Parking podcast, is a honest conversations about artificial intelligence and self-driving vehicles. What is the tagline is, and how technology will or won't change our daily lives. If podcasting existed in 1885, we'd be discussing the merits of AC power versus DC power. We might interview Tesla and ask him why he can't raise money. Lord Westinghouse, like, why do you hate Edison so much? What's good about your light bulb? Why does electric light, when will it become cheaper than candles? And so all these conversations we have about autonomy and AI. And so, my co-host is Brian Selesky, the CEO of Argo.
Right.
And we have, we're trying to, we are having these conversations with people about all aspects of the sector and things beyond it. So in season 1, we had Mark Rosekind. He was the administrator of the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. So he was in charge, literally, of everything having to do with safety for the federal government. And today he is at Zoox, which was acquired by Amazon. I don't know if they're really a competitor because, of course, I think we're better. But he's a great character, and and we are open to having. We are not. This is not. This is an independent podcast intended to have open conversations. So we had him on to discuss how do you define safety and why why are autonomous vehicles necessary. We had a conversation with Dr. Philip Coatman, who is kind of he's secretly one of the most important people in safety. He was a submariner who has a company called Edge Case Research. And when you're on a nuclear submarine, things have to work. I mean, there's no negotiation. There's no, reliability is number one. So we've had a number of great guests. We had a guy named Josh Davis. He is a screenwriter. He wrote a story about John McAfee, and he also knew Elon Musk in the early days. And so he's written a script based on the film 12 Angry Men, which is remade, but the person being tried for murder is the CEO of a self-driving car company.
Interesting.
So,
there's only a matter of time before something like that actually does happen in reality.
So my mom is terrified of the idea of a car that drives itself. And so the idea is that where does one go if one wants to learn about the future of robots, self-driving, and AI that is not sensationalized the way it is in films? And and what are these things going to look like when they are become consumer products? If someone told me 10 years ago that a Roomba would exist, I'd say, well, of course it would. But no one talked about the fact that you don't want it running over your dog if it had just moved. And let's talk about that now and make sure that the device has a sensor, and let's get the guy on the podcast. So that's what the podcast is designed to do.
I have to be honest. I have never thought about the idea that a Roomba could go over dog poop, and what a disaster would that be? So if nothing else,
it became a video.
I guess you're proving that even Roombas can have oh shit moments of their own.
That's an edge case for a Roomba. And the idea of edge cases has existed throughout history. For everything we can invent, there's a second order consequence. All we can ever do is try to preempt them and make sure that the consequences, whatever they are good, that they're good.
Oh, I love it. I think this is a perfect place to end today. I loved every second of today's chat. I thank you again for coming on. Always fun to spend time with you. Hopefully we can keep chatting more and more and more in the future. I always get a kick out of hearing the stories. And I miss you, and I hope to see you in person sometime soon too.
I will come down and I'll see you in, when the travel bans are eased. And if I may add, the we are, No Parking Podcast on Twitter is at No Parking Pod.
Oh, I do have one last question. Where'd you get the name? Why is it called No Parking Podcast?
Well, the if you spend any time in an urban center, and I know you have, parking is incredibly expensive. In New York City, it's almost between $60 and $100 a day. A monthly spot is between $500 and $1,000, and parking is evaporating. It's not affordable. The interplay between automotive traffic, mass transit, and subways and walking is very complex. And no one technology can solve traffic,
Yeah.
but it is possible to address it through a holistic group of solutions. Autonomous vehicles are one of them. And parking is, a lack of parking is a sign of an unhealthy urban center,
Yeah.
need of multiple solutions. So that's why.
I figured it was either that or some play because the cars never come to stop. But
Well,
check
that's
it
part of
out.
it. Yes, we do.
Yeah,
That's also part of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. So I was testing my hypothesis again. Alex, great to see you. Thank you again for everyone that's tuning in. If you haven't liked the video, please give it a quick like. We'd appreciate it. If you think you've got friends who'd enjoy it, please forward it and subscribe to our channel so you catch these videos moving forward. Thanks again for tuning in to Oh Shit.
Great to see you.